So this video will focus on what we call the quadratic formula, which you can use to solve any quadratic equation, meaning anything that has a squared as the highest exponent. This formula is very useful because, for example, I'm just going to make up a problem. Say you had this, like x squared plus 9x minus 3 equals 0, and you needed to solve that. Normally we would go about by factoring and trying to use zero product property. However, we know that the first spots have to be x and x. The last spots have to be 3 and 1. But there's no way to get 9 in the middle from 3 and 1, right? 3x and 1x. If you subtract them or add them, you're either going to get, 1, not 2. You're either going to get 4x, negative 4x, 2x, negative 2x. So this one is not factorable. However, it is possible to solve using the quadratic formula, which I'll show you in a minute. These examples might be different from what we do on Zoom based on whether or not my iPad is working again, but they're the same process. So quadratic formula is something that, by the time you get to Algebra 2, you do want to have it memorized when you're in there. Thankfully, now you're working from home. You don't have to memorize it, but I would try your best to do it. So the formula itself is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. I have a funny little story that goes along with this that kind of helps me remember. So you think of, there once was a negative bee, like a negative bumblebee. And this bee was kind of sad because he couldn't decide whether or not, plus or minus, he wanted to go to the radical party, cool party. There would be square dancing, b squared, and they were going to play cards, but take away, subtract the 4 aces, 4ac. And he also didn't know if he wanted to go to the party because it was going to be over pretty late at 2 a.m. So that's my little trick for helping you remember the formula. And now we're just going to work on applying it. So first, for all these problems, you want to identify a, b, and c. So a is always the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c stands for the constant. So we're going to list everything we need to the side. So we need a, we need b, and be careful with their signs. So far they're both positive, but then c is a negative 2. And I'm just going to rewrite the formula so we can go ahead and plug our numbers in. B squared minus 4ac over 2a. So the other pieces that you'll need to find are also b squared and 4ac. So let's just do them over here to the side. So b squared is going to be 5 squared, which is 25. Remember, a number squared is always positive. And we'll also need 4ac. So that would be 4 times a is 3 times c is negative 2. That would be 12 times negative 2, which is negative 24. So these are the numbers that you are going to need to plug in eventually. I like to do that work to the side so that way it's less messy when we go to plug it into the formula. So we have x equals negative b, so that would be negative 5, plus and minus the square root of b squared we found, it's 25, take away 4ac. So now it's minus negative 24 in the square root, and then over 2 times a. So 2 times 3 is 6. And then we can just keep going and simplifying. So x equals negative 5 plus and minus the square root of, and here we have minus and negative, so that means that we're adding these, so that would be 49, which actually makes this one pretty nice, over 6. And then we're going to go ahead and just simplify the square root. So the square root of 49, perfect square, it's 7. So we have negative 5 plus and minus 7 over 6. So your answers for x, you'll have 2 of them. The first one will be negative 5 plus 7 over 6. And then the second one will be negative 5 minus 7 over 6. And then we'll just simplify. So negative 5 plus 7 would be 2. So this is 2 over 6, which simplifies to 1/3. And then negative 5 minus 7 would be negative 12 divided by 6, which is negative 2. So those would be your two answers. Okay, so next one again, we're going to start it the same way. So list out A, B is negative 7, C, list B squared, which is negative 7 squared, and negative times a negative times itself was going to be positive, 49. And then we also need for AC. So that would be 4 times 2 times 3, which is 8 times 3, so 24. And now we can go again and plug into our formula. So I'll try to keep this formula up for you. So x equals negative b. So now we want negative 7, which makes this a positive 7. Plus and minus the square root. B squared, we found it, it's 49. Minus 4ac, we found it, it's 24. Over 2a, so that would be 4. 2 times 2 is 4. So now we have 7 plus and minus the square root of 49 minus 24 would be 25 over 4. So again, this one works out to be a perfect square. So the square root of 25 is 5. So we can just go write x equals 7 plus 5 over 4, and x equals 7 minus 5 over 4. So this would be 12 over 4, which is 3. And this would be 2 over 4, which is 1/2. And remember I mentioned earlier that the highest exponent in any equation will always tell you how many answers there are. So since these are all quadratic with the highest exponent of 2, you'll always have 2 answers, or for the most part. Before we do number 3, I just want to go and show you one that maybe doesn't come out to be a perfect square. So I'm just going to do an extra one over here. So let's try 3n squared plus 10n minus 1 equals 0. Okay, so again we'll list A, B, C. So it's 3, 10, negative 1. B squared is 10 squared, which is 100. 4ac is 4 times 3 times negative 1, which is negative 12. So we know that we're going to need to plug these in eventually. Okay, so again, the formula, it's negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And then we're just plugging into there. So we have x equals negative b would be negative 10 plus and minus the square root of b squared was 100 minus 4ac, which was negative 12. Remember, minus negative becomes plus, right? Over 2a, which would be 6. And then we can simplify. So negative 10 plus and minus the square root of 112 over 6. Now, square root of 112 is not a perfect square. However, you can figure it out on your calculator. So we can set up our two answers already. We know it's negative 10 plus whatever that is over 6. And then negative 10 minus whatever that is over 6. Then I'm just going to go on my calculator and take the square root of 112. We can round to 1 or 2 decimal places for now. So if you don't have a calculator, you can go online to decimals.com/scientific. And then to find a square root, you're just going to use this key here that my pointer is on. So you're going to type square root of 112. And that gives us over here, it's about 10.58. So we'll go to the hundredths place. So it's 10.58. Okay, so back over here, and we're plugging in 10.58. And now to actually figure these out, you would just type them in your calculator. So negative 10 plus 10.58 over 6. So we'll go back. So we need negative, I'm just typing on the keyboard, 10 plus 10.58. First figure out what that is and click enter. Oh, I'm sorry. You know what you can actually do? Put that in parentheses because it's in the top of the fraction. And then just put divided by 6. And you'll see it's about 0.097. What you could also do is negative 10 plus 10.58. And then remember that number, so it's 0.58, and then you're just doing 0.58 over 6. So still 0.097 for one of our answers. And then we also have to go plug in this one. So negative 10 minus 10.58 over 6. So again, we have negative 10, negative 10 minus 10.58. You can remember that number, negative 20.58. And then divide that by 6. We get negative 3.43. So most of the time, these probably will not come out to be perfect squares because usually the perfect square ones are in fact factorable. So you just have to use your calculator to figure out the square root. So we're going to kind of go out of order of, I think, what I have on the paper, just so that way we could do another one like that. Yeah, number 4 should be like that as well. Let's see if I can keep the formula somewhere so that way we can see it. There we go. We don't have to keep rewriting it. But for you, you might want to keep rewriting it because the more you write it, the more you say it, the more you use it, the more likely you are to remember it. Okay, so let's list A, B, C. When there's no number in front as a coefficient, it is 1. B is negative 8. C is negative 5. Okay, so then we have x equals, see if we could put it all up together. There we go. So we're going to do negative b, we forgot to do b squared and 4ac. So b squared is negative 8 times itself, right? So b squared is 64. And then 4ac is 4 times 1 times negative 5, which should be negative 20. So we will need those numbers when we're solving. So x equals negative b. Negative negative becomes positive. Plus or minus. The square root of b squared, we found it, 64. Minus 4ac, that would be minus negative 20, which you know this will turn into plus, right? Over 2a, 2 times a is 2. Okay, so 8 plus and minus the square root of 84 over 2. And then we have to use our calculator to find that square root. So it's going to be 8 plus whatever that is over 2. And then also 8 minus whatever that square root is over 2. Just going to do it on the calculator really quick. Square root 84. Oh my goodness, it's not letting me type. Okay, so it's about 9.17. Where were we? Here. So plus 9.17. Okay, so 8 plus 9.17 is going to be 17.17 over 2. Use your calculator to figure that out. 8.585 for one answer. The other one, 8 minus 9.17. Is negative 1.17. That's what I thought. Some of these you can do in your head. Over 2 should give you negative 0.585. Okay, so those are how most of these are going to be. And then let's go back and do, we'll do numbers 3 and 5. So again, let's list A, B, C, 5, negative 2, and 7. B squared is negative 2 times itself, which is 4. And then 4AC is 4 times 5 times 7. That would be 20 times 7, which is 140. And then let's rewrite our formula. So as you're writing it, I would say it out loud too. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus, oh my goodness, I made a mistake, minus 4ac over 2a. The more you do this, honestly, once you do it like even 3 or 4 or 5 times, like it's probably just going to stick with you. And it really is something that you don't want to forget. I remember when I was in college and I was going from calculus 2 to calculus 3 and I had to take this little test and they were asking us like something with quadratic formula and I didn't use it for like 2 or 3 years, so I was like, I forget, and I was forgetting the b squared. So you do want to practice it often. Okay, so we're just going to plug in here. So negative b, negative negative becomes positive, plus and minus the square root of b squared, which is 4, minus 4ac, which is 140, over 2a, 2 times 5 is 10. So we have 2 plus and minus the square root. 4 minus 140 would be negative 136 because we're taking away 140 from 4. So we're in the negatives over 10. Now, there is a rule in math that the square root of a negative does not exist in the real number system. So whenever you have the square root of a negative number, you, for now, for algebra 1, you can stop and just say that the answer to this is imaginary. There is a solution. It's an imaginary solution, which you'll learn about imaginary numbers in algebra 2. But for right now, all you have to do is stop and say, oh, this doesn't exist with real numbers. We can't take square root of a negative. Imaginary. But do make sure that your first number within the square root is always going to be a positive number. So this first number here is always positive. So never start with a negative or else you might get imaginary when it's not really. B squared is positive always, because something squared, any number times itself, will always be positive, whether it's positive times positive or negative times positive. So basically, if 4ac is greater than b squared, it's 4ac is not negative, then you're probably going to have an imaginary answer. Okay, we'll do one more, I believe also comes out to be imaginary, but let's see. So A, B, C, all positives. B squared, 3 times 3 is 9. 4ac is 4 times 8 times 2. That would be 32 times 2, which is 64. Okay, and then let's go rewrite our formula. Negative b plus and minus the square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So negative b is negative 3. Plus and minus. The square root of b squared is 9. Minus 4ac is 64. Over 2a. 2 times 8 is 16. And we'll simplify. So we start with what's in the square root. 9 minus 64. This is going to be negative, right? We're starting with only a little bit 9 and taking away 64. Actually comes out to be negative, I believe, 55 over 16. But since there's a negative inside the square root, you can just stop. You don't have to evaluate anything for Algebra 1. Algebra 2 you will, but right now you don't. So just stop there and say, oh, this one's imaginary, and you can show your work to support it, that it's negative 55 inside. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and have a wonderful day.